you'll discover the psychological mechanism Carl Jung called the shadow, a concept that's transforming the lives of thousands of people around the world. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to identify your own shadow and use this knowledge to dramatically improve your relationships. Get ready for a journey into the darkest side of the human psyche. You'll understand why some people inexplicably irritate you, why you sometimes act in ways you don't even recognize, and most importantly, how to transform this discovery into real personal power. Jung said that our shadow contains not only our fears, but also our untapped potential. Let's discover yours. But before we dive into this fascinating psychological territory, I need to warn you. What you're about to discover about yourself may be uncomfortable. Jung warned that getting to know one's shadow is one of the most courageous tasks a human being can undertake. Are you ready for this journey of self-discovery? Carl Jung was not just an ordinary Swiss psychiatrist. Born in 1875, he began his career working alongside Sigmund Freud, but soon realized there were layers of the human mind that not even Freud had fully explored. Jung developed the concept of the collective unconscious, but one of his most disturbing and transformative discoveries was what he called the shadow. Imagine Jung in his office, observing patient after patient, noticing strange patterns, good people who had violent nightmares, perpetually calm individuals who exploded into inexplicable rages, rational people who made completely irrational decisions. Jung began to realize that we all carry a kind of psychological double, a part of our personality that we reject, deny, and hide, not only from others, but especially from ourselves. The shadow isn't about being bad or good. It's not about traditional morality. It's about psychological integrity. Jung discovered that all of us, without exception, develop a persona from childhood, a social mask we present to the world. But what happens to all those parts of us that don't fit this mask? They don't disappear. They go into the shadow. And here lies the most fascinating paradox. The more you deny your shadow, the more it controls your life. The more you try to be perfect, the more imperfection emerges in unexpected ways. Jung observed that the shadow always finds a way to express itself, sometimes through projections onto others, sometimes through emotional outbursts, sometimes through self-sabotage. But what exactly is this shadow? How does it form? And why did Jung consider his discovery as dangerous as it was liberating? The shadow is essentially a psychological archive of everything you've learned to consider unacceptable about yourself. From the moment we're born, we begin receiving messages about which aspects of our personality are welcome and which should be hidden. Your parents smiled when you were kind, but frowned when you showed anger. School rewarded your obedience but punished your rebelliousness. Society applauded your generosity but criticized your ambition. Let's be specific with real-life examples. Consider a child who grows up in a family where anger is never acceptable. This child learns to suppress any sign of irritation, frustration, or indignation. Gradually, they develop a persona of always calm and understanding. But the anger doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow. Years later, this person may find themselves exploding disproportionately over small things, or developing psychosomatic illnesses, or attracting relationships with extremely aggressive people. Why? Because repressed anger finds indirect ways to express itself. Or consider someone who grew up in an environment where wanting things for yourself is selfish. This person develops a highly altruistic persona, always putting the needs of others before their own. Their ambition, their personal desires, their need for recognition, all of this goes to the shadow. The result? Unconscious resentment, emotional exhaustion, and, paradoxically, manipulative behaviors to indirectly obtain what they don't allow themselves to want directly. Jung identified that the shadow forms through a process he called splitting. Imagine your entire personality as a circle. Society, family, and upbringing act like psychological scissors, cutting pieces from this circle and saying, "This is acceptable, this is not." The acceptable pieces form your conscious persona. The unacceptable pieces are pushed into the unconscious, forming the shadow. But here's a crucial discovery from Jung. The shadow doesn't just contain negative aspects. It also holds untapped potential, denied talents, strengths that have been deemed dangerous or inadequate. The person whose creativity has been stifled because art doesn't make money carries a powerful creative force within the shadow. The individual who has learned that to be a leader is to be arrogant may have a natural capacity for transformative leadership within the shadow. The shadow operates like a psychological magnet. It attracts situations, people, and experiences that force you to confront what you're denying. If you have anger in the shadow, you'll attract people who express anger uncontrollably, and this will deeply irritate you. If you have ambition in the shadow, you'll feel uncomfortable around overly ambitious people. Jung discovered that what bothers us most in others is often a direct reflection of what we most deny in ourselves. Now that you understand what the shadow is, the burning question is, how do you identify yours? Jung developed practical methods for this, and you can start applying them right now. Jung developed several techniques for identifying shadow content, and I'll share with you the most effective methods you can apply immediately. The first and most powerful is what we call projection mapping. Practice test 1. The mirror of irritation. Think of someone who deeply irritates you, that person whose name alone makes you uncomfortable. Now write down exactly which characteristics of that person bother you most. Be specific. She's too dramatic. He's too selfish. She always wants to be the center of attention. He never admits he's wrong. Now comes the uncomfortable but revealing part. For each characteristic you listed, ask yourself honestly, in what situations do I demonstrate this same behavior? Don't be quick to deny it. Jung warned that our first reaction is always, I'm not like that. But if you stop and reflect deeply, you'll begin to find subtle clues. For example, you say you hate dramatic people, but perhaps you yourself escalate situations when you want attention, just in more socially acceptable ways. You criticize someone for being selfish, but it could be that you have difficulty putting your own needs first, and this generates an unconscious resentment toward those who can do this naturally. Practice test 2. Dream and symbol analysis. Jung discovered that the shadow often appears in our dreams as characters of the same sex as us, often antagonistic. Start paying attention to the villains in your dreams. What characteristics do they have? How do they act? What do they want? Often these dream characters represent repressed aspects of your own personality, but it's not just dreams. Also, notice your everyday lapses, those moments when you act in a way that's not like you. When you explode for no apparent reason, when you make an impulsive decision that you can't explain later, when you feel an intense emotion that makes no sense. Jung called these shadow eruptions, moments when repressed content finds an opening to express itself. Practice test 3. The extreme awe method. Here's an aspect of the shadow that's rarely discussed. It also contains our unrealized potential. Think of people you admire intensely, almost to the point of envy. What qualities do they have that you wish you had? Jung discovered that we often project onto the shadow not only negative aspects, but also positive qualities that we deem unattainable or unsuitable for us. If you deeply admire courageous people, it may be that your own courage is suppressed in the shadow because you've learned that exposing yourself is dangerous. If you're attracted to highly creative people, perhaps your creativity is dormant in the shadow because you've internalized that art is not practical. Practice test 4. Repetitive pattern analysis. Notice the patterns that repeat themselves in your life, especially those you can't logically explain. Do you consistently attract relationships with controlling people? Perhaps you harbor a need for control in your shadow that you don't allow yourself to consciously express. Do you constantly find yourself in situations where you need to save others? It could be that your own need to be saved resides in your shadow. Jung observed that life has a tendency to create situations that force us to encounter our shadow. This is no coincidence. It is the natural process of the psyche attempting to integrate and become whole. Immediate practical exercise. Take a piece of paper now and complete these sentences. The people who irritate me the most have the characteristic of, if I were to be completely honest, I'm envious of people who, when no one is looking, the emotion I'm most scared of feeling is, if I could be anyone in the world, I would be someone who. Your answers are direct clues to the content of your shadow. Jung didn't develop the shadow theory out of academic curiosity. He was concerned about the devastating consequences he observed when people lived completely disconnected from their shadow aspects. And these consequences are more common and destructive than you might think. Destructive projection. How we destroy relationships. When you don't acknowledge your own shadow, You inevitably project it onto others. This means you'll see in others exactly what you most deny about yourself, but in a distorted and amplified way. Jung observed couples destroying each other through projections. One partner accuses the other of being cold and calculating, when in fact it's they who have difficulty expressing emotions. The other responds by accusing the first of being dramatic and manipulative, projecting their own tendency to dramatize situations to get attention. Let's be specific with a real example that Jung documented. One of his patients was an extremely religious and moralistic man who constantly criticized the immorality of those around him. He projected his own repressed sexuality, which was in the shadow, onto everyone he encountered, seeing sin and temptation everywhere. The result? Destroyed relationships, estranged children, a non-existent social life, and ironically, a sexual obsession that consumed his thoughts precisely because it was being so vehemently denied. Emotional outbursts. When the shadow erupts, the energy repressed in the shadow doesn't remain quiet indefinitely. Jung observed that people who maintain a very rigid, perfect persona often experience what he called enantiodromia, a sudden reversal to the opposite. The always calm person who explodes into uncontrolled rage. The always generous individual who suddenly acts completely selfishly. The always rational person who makes completely impulsive decisions. Consider the case documented by Jung of a woman who cultivated an image of the perfect mother, always patient, always understanding, always available to everyone. Her anger, frustration, and personal needs were completely repressed in the shadow. The result was a devastating outburst in which she abandoned her family for several months, behaving in a way completely opposite to everything she had represented up until then. Jung explained that this was not madness, but the shadow finally finding a way to express itself. Self-sabotage, when you are your own enemy. One of the most subtle and destructive manifestations of the ignored shadow is self-sabotage. Jung realized that when we deny aspects of ourselves, they find ways to sabotage our conscious efforts. A person who denies their ambition may unconsciously sabotage opportunities for professional growth. An individual who rejects their need for intimacy may destroy close relationships just as they begin to deepen. A fascinating example Jung studied was that of a talented artist who consciously desired success, but harbored a deep-seated shadow belief that success corrupts artistic purity. The result? He systematically sabotaged his own opportunities, arriving late for important meetings, handing in incomplete work, and arguing with potential partners. His shadow was protecting his purity at the expense of his fulfillment. Superficial relationships, the impossibility of true intimacy. Jung discovered that people who live only through their persona, completely denying their shadow, are incapable of forming genuinely intimate relationships. Why? Because true intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability means showing aspects of yourself that are less than perfect. When you only show your good side, you attract people who only relate to your mask, not to who you really are. The result is a chronic feeling of not being truly known or understood. You can be surrounded by people but feel deeply lonely because no one truly knows who you are beyond your persona. The phenomenon of social polarization. Jung also observed the collective consequences of the unintegrated shadow. Entire groups can project their collective shadow onto other groups, creating conflict, prejudice, and even war. When a society defines itself as completely good or civilized, it must project its evil or savagery elsewhere. Jung saw this as one of the psychological roots of racism, extreme nationalism, and other forms of intolerance. But Jung was no pessimist. He discovered that there is a way out, a process he called shadow integration. And when you learn to do this consciously, the results are transformative. Shadow integration is, according to Jung, one of the most courageous and transformative tasks a human being can undertake. It's not about eliminating negative aspects or releasing destructive impulses indiscriminately. It's about bringing what was previously unconscious into consciousness, so you can consciously choose how to express these energies constructively. Step 1. Non-judgmental acknowledgement. The art of embracing the unacceptable. The first step, and perhaps the most difficult, is to develop the ability to recognize aspects of your shadow without immediate moral judgment. Jung emphasized that judgment blocks integration. When you say, "I have anger, but anger is bad," you are perpetuating the split. The correct approach is, I have anger. And anger is an energy that can be used constructively or destructively. Let's be practical. If you've identified envy in your shadow, the first step isn't to blame yourself for being envious. The first step is to acknowledge, yes, I feel envious. It's part of me. Envy is signaling something important to me about my own unfulfilled desires. Jung found that when we stop fighting an aspect of the shadow, it often naturally transforms. For example, a Jungian patient who completely denied her aggression went through a fascinating process. First, she recognized that yes, she had aggression within her. Then, instead of judging it as bad, she began to explore it. When do I feel this aggressive energy? What is it trying to tell me? In what situations does it emerge? She discovered that her aggression emerged primarily when her boundaries were violated, when she felt disrespected, or when her needs were ignored. Aggression wasn't badness. It was an internal warning system trying to protect her dignity and integrity. Step 2. Internal dialogue. Talking to your shadow. Jung developed a revolutionary technique called active imagination, where you literally converse with aspects of your shadow as if they were separate individuals. This may sound strange at first, but the results are profound. Here's how. Identify an aspect of your shadow that you discovered through the previous tests. Let's say it's selfishness. In a moment of stillness, imagine this selfishness as a person sitting in front of you. What does he or she look like? How does he or she dress? What expression does he or she have on his or her face? Now ask direct questions. Why are you in my life? What do you want from me? When are you strongest? How can I work with you instead of against you? Jung reported extraordinary cases where patients discovered that aspects they considered purely negative actually contained important messages. Selfishness turned out to be a sign that the person needed to establish healthier boundaries. Aggression turned out to be vital energy that was being wasted in repression rather than channeled into constructive achievements. Step 3. Conscious expression. Channeling shadow energy. Once you recognize and understand an aspect of your shadow, the next step is to find conscious and constructive ways to express it. Jung observed that repressed energy, when consciously released, often transforms into creativity, leadership, passion, and life force. Let's get specific with real examples. A person who has discovered anger in their shadow can channel it through social activism, competitive sports, expressive art, or simply learning to set firm but respectful boundaries in relationships. Embedded anger becomes a force for transformation. Someone who recognizes repressed ambition may begin to set clear personal goals, seek opportunities for professional growth, or embark on creative projects. Integrated ambition becomes a driver of personal fulfillment. A person who has identified a need for attention in their shadow can channel this need through teaching, public speaking, performance art, or simply learning to communicate their needs directly in relationships. The need for integrated attention becomes charisma and the ability to positively influence. Step 4. The individuation process. Becoming who you really are. Jung saw shadow integration as part of a larger process he called individuation, the process of becoming a whole integrated individual, rather than living solely through a fragmented persona. When you integrate your shadow, you stop wasting enormous energy trying to keep aspects of yourself repressed. This freed energy can then be directed toward growth, creativity, and fulfillment. The process doesn't happen overnight. Jung observed that it's a lifelong endeavor, with layers constantly being uncovered and integrated, but the benefits begin immediately. Jung's patients reported feeling more real, more alive, and more authentic almost immediately after they began integrating aspects of their shadow. Advanced practical techniques. Shadow journaling. Set aside 10 minutes a day to write about aspects of yourself that you would normally deny or hide. Don't edit, don't judge, just write. Shadow meditation. During meditation, instead of trying to empty your mind, deliberately invite aspects of your shadow to emerge into awareness. Observe them without judgment. Expressive art. Use drawing, painting, dance, music, or creative writing to express aspects of your shadow that are difficult to verbalize. Conscious role-playing. In appropriate situations, consciously experiment with expressing aspects of your shadow in a controlled way. For example, if you're normally always nice, practice being honest about disagreements in safe conversations. The benefits of shadow integration are so profound that Jung considered this work essential for anyone who wanted to live a full and authentic life. These aren't theoretical benefits. They're practical, measurable changes that fundamentally transform how you experience life and relationships. Radical authenticity. Stop living a lie. The first and most immediate benefit is a sense of authenticity you may never have experienced before. When you stop expending enormous energy keeping aspects of yourself hidden, you can finally relax and be who you truly are. Jung observed that people who integrate their shadow often report a feeling of coming home to themselves. Consider the case of an executive Jung treated who had spent decades cultivating an image of an always reliable and flawless professional. His vulnerability, insecurity, and need for support were completely in the shadow. When he began to integrate these aspects, occasionally admitting when he didn't know something, asking for help when he needed it, showing appropriate vulnerability with close colleagues, not only did his mental health improve dramatically, but paradoxically, his leadership became more effective. People began to trust him more, not less, because he became genuinely human and relatable. Relationships of extraordinary depth. When you integrate your shadow, you become capable of forming relationships of a depth that was previously impossible. Why? Because you stop needing people to see only your good sides, and this frees both you and them to be authentic. Jung documented the case of a couple on the verge of divorce due to mutual shadow projections. The wife projected her own need for control onto her husband, constantly accusing him of being controlling. The husband projected his own inner drama onto her, calling her overly emotional. When they both began to recognize and integrate these aspects within themselves, something extraordinary happened. They stopped fighting these characteristics in each other and began to appreciate them. Her need for control revealed itself as a sense of organization and planning. His emotionality revealed itself as a capacity for passion and expression. The relationship not only saved itself, it transformed into something much richer and more satisfying. Liberated life energy, the end of chronic exhaustion. One of the most surprising aspects of shadow integration is the amount of energy it releases. Jung discovered that keeping aspects of ourselves repressed consumes an extraordinary amount of psychic energy. It's like having a program constantly running in the background of your mental computer, draining resources that could be used for creativity, productivity, and fulfillment. An artist Jung treated had repressed her ambition because she grew up believing that real artists don't care about success. The result? She lived in constant self-sabotage, never promoting her work, never seeking opportunities, always feeling exhausted and unmotivated. When she embraced her ambition, recognizing that striving for success didn't compromise her artistic integrity, it was as if a dam had broken. Energy that had been spent repressing herself was redirected toward creating and promoting her work. Within 2 years, she had launched her first solo exhibition and established a sustainable career. Explosive creativity, accessing untapped potentials. The shadow doesn't just contain negative aspects, it also holds talents, abilities, and potential that have been repressed because they were considered inadequate or dangerous. Jung observed that many people harbor extraordinary creative abilities in their shadow that were stifled in childhood or adolescence. An accountant Jung treated discovered he had completely suppressed his artistic side because his father constantly repeated that art is a waste of time. When he began to integrate this aspect of the shadow, he not only began painting on weekends, but his creativity began to manifest itself in his work as well. He developed innovative ways to present financial data, created more efficient systems, and was eventually promoted to leadership positions where his integrated creativity became a professional differentiator. Sharp intuition, reading people and situations correctly. When you integrate your shadow, you automatically become more adept at recognizing shadow aspects in others, not to judge them, but to understand motivations, predict behaviors, and navigate relationships more wisely. Jung called this developing a higher function of perception. A therapist Jung supervised initially had difficulty working with difficult patients, those who were manipulative, aggressive, or dishonest. When she integrated her own manipulative, aggressive, and dishonest aspects, which we all have to some degree, she suddenly became extraordinarily effective at working with these patients. She could recognize their strategies, understand their motivations, and work with them rather than against them. Authentic leadership, influencing through integrity. Jung observed that truly effective leaders are often those who have done some shadow integration work. They don't try to be perfect, they are integrated humans. This makes them more relatable, more trustworthy, and ironically, more respected. But perhaps the most profound benefit of shadow integration is something Jung considered the ultimate goal of all psychological development: becoming a whole person, rather than a good person. Carl Jung once said, "I'd rather be a whole person than a good person." This phrase encapsulates the wisdom of shadow integration. It's not about becoming a worse person or abandoning your moral values. It's about becoming a whole, authentic, integrated person, one who recognizes and consciously works with all dimensions of human experience. Transformative recap: your shadow exists and is active in your life right now, whether you acknowledge it or not. It manifests itself through projections, in people you inexplicably hate or intensely love. It emerges through emotional outbursts that are not like you. It works through self-sabotage, destroying your own conscious efforts. And it reveals itself through repetitive patterns in your life that you cannot logically understand. But when you learn to consciously recognize, dialogue with, and integrate your shadow, your life changes fundamentally. You stop wasting energy on repression and self-sabotage. You develop relationships of extraordinary depth. You access creativity and potential you never knew you possessed. You become an authentic person, instead of living through a social mask. Your transformative challenge. Here's your practical challenge for the next 7 days. Every day, identify a characteristic in someone that deeply bothers you. Write it down. Then, spend 5 minutes in honest reflection, asking yourself, where exactly does this characteristic exist in me? How does it manifest? When does it emerge? What is it trying to teach me about myself? At the end of 7 days, you'll have a basic map of your shadow. And this will be just the beginning of a journey of self-discovery that can completely transform your experience of being alive. Jung warned that knowing your shadow is simultaneously the hardest and most liberating work you can do. Difficult because it requires brutal honesty with yourself. Liberating because it finally allows you to stop fighting yourself and start working with yourself. Your defining choice. You have a fundamental choice now. You can continue living through a partial persona, wasting energy on repression, forming superficial relationships, and wondering why you always seem to be fighting against some invisible force in your life. Or you can have the courage to embark on the journey of shadow integration, recognizing that you are a complete, complex human being, with both light and shadow, and that your wholeness is your greatest strength. Jung said, "He who looks outside, dreams. He who looks inside, awakens." Your shadow is within you, waiting to be recognized, integrated, and transformed into life force. The question is, are you ready to awaken? If this dive into shadow psychology touched you deeply, leave a comment. I recognize my shadow. Share this video with someone you think needs this transformative perspective, and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing insights from deep psychology. Remember, your shadow is not your enemy. It's the half of you waiting to be embraced, integrated, and transformed into power.